This is the most in-depth scope review I've ever published here on Ultimate Reloader. The subject, the Athlon Midas TAC 5-25x56 first focal plane scope. Gavin here from UltimateReloader.com. I'm back with Travis Fox. Travis, thank you for joining us again.
Thanks for having me, Gavin. Glad to be here.
We have both spent time behind the 3 Athlon scopes that you see here. So we're going to do a little bit of comparison in this video, but really the spotlight is an in-depth overall end-to-end review of the Athlon Midas TAC 5-25x56 scope. So what we're going to talk about in this video, we're going to cover what's in the box, which is pretty much what you see here. We're going to talk specs, feeds, and speeds. We're going to do some enhanced laboratory testing, and then we're going to talk shooting impressions. So what you see is what you get with a couple exceptions. We've got Athlon low rings here. These are 34mm rings, of course, because we've got a 34mm tube. And I also added a Lone Star clamp-on bubble level. Those have worked really well for me.
Yep.
So we have the box. The box actually does come with really nice inserts, like is typical for Athlon. You know, you've got really nice foam on both ends. It comes in the bag with the rubber band. I wanted to get this out of the box and I wanted to use it a bunch before we even talked about it. So I didn't film that part, but there's not really a whole lot to see that you haven't seen in the other unboxing videos. We've got the owner's manual, the silica gel, don't chew on that. Right?
I need that for later.
Okay, yeah, keep your pockets dry. It's been that hot lately. We've got the lens cleaning cloth, we've got the appropriate Allen key, and some extra set screws. So that's what's in the box. It's pretty straightforward. Why don't we next cover specs, feeds, and speeds. So let's talk specs. For this scope, we've got a 56mm objective lens. This is one of those scopes that's going to allow you to gather light in a really effective way, and we saw that when we did the testing, definitely.
Works great.
Yeah.
Good light gathering.
Mm-hmm. Like I mentioned, it's got the 34mm tube, so you know if you're into scopes, you probably know there's 1-inch tubes. There's 30mm tubes, now there's 34mm tubes, some are 35, and so on and so forth. But 34 is becoming a popular size.
Yeah, pretty regular to see those.
Mm-hmm. It's partially a function of the kind of elevation and windage adjustment range that you're going to get.
You need to get all the mechanics inside this area.
Yep, exactly. So we've got HD glass, we've got multi-coated lenses, and we didn't mention yet the price point, right? MSRP's hovering around $1,000.
Yep, street prices for a bit less than that.
Yep. So for a first focal plane scope of this quality, you know, that's a pretty good value, I'd say.
You get a great bang for the buck on this scope.
Yep.
It's a very impressive scope for the money.
So XPL exterior coating, it's kind of slick. It doesn't mar real easily. We've had this on several rifles, and I'd say it actually still looks fairly brand new.
Looks great. Yeah, we've used it quite a bit.
Yep. And water, fog, shockproof, which is good because, you know, PRS matches and hunting don't necessarily happen in good weather.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't get to pick and choose where we're playing at.
Yep. Etched glass reticles, good for resiliency, and it looks nice and sharp.
Yeah, that's part of what's helping with the shockproof is with the etched glass reticles, you don't have a wire in there to move around. So it's there, it's going to stay there, it's going to stay in place.
Yep. Field of view at 100 yards, I'm just going to read this off the slide here, 22.1 feet at 5 power and 4.5 feet at 25 power, and the eye relief is 3.7 inches. So continuing with features and construction, this scope features a one-piece aluminum tube, which is nice for strength. There's not extra joints and seams for the weather to get in. It's got an exposed elevation turret and a capped windage turret. You were mentioning that earlier.
Cap windage turret is good for competitors, people who are not adjusting their windage and don't want to have to worry about resetting that. So it eliminates that. If you want to do your windage, you can pop the turret off. It's all adjustable there, just like the exposed turret here. But most people are capping them now.
15.1 inches overall length. We've got 30 ounces, so it's going to kind of fall right in there. It seemed pretty comparable to, for instance, the Cronus that we were comparing it to. Of course, that has a little bit higher magnification range on it, but
yeah, it's a little bit heavier.
Yeah,
but
just a little bit.
10 mil rotation. With each rotation, you get 10 mils. The one thing that's pretty cool about this one that I like, Gavin, 25-yard parallax. You can get that focus really close. This is really good for, say, if you're in the NRL 22 and you're doing some of those close 25-yard targets. This thing will get you close, real close, and then it's going to go way out there too. Very nice.
And actually, if you're practicing, you can practice at 25 yards and use the reduced scale.
Yeah, for like dry fire practice.
Yeah,
there you go.
I definitely really like that. And we've got 32 mil of elevation and windage adjustability.
Both.
Yep. And if you're sitting on top of a 20 MOA scope rail, that's going to treat you real well out, beyond 1,000 yards, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we get a precision zero stop here also too.
Yeah, it's hard for me to use a scope now without a zero stop.
Pretty handy. It can really save you.
Yep.
How many times did I dial that?
Exactly. So I'd say overall this scope on paper stacks up really well. What we should talk about next is our lab testing.
It was very good.
So this is where the cool stuff happens. I was telling Travis about the testing I had done previously on the Athlon Aries scope. You're going to want to check out that video. We got some pretty good results in that and really paved the way for this advanced optics testing that we're making some serious inroads on. So in this video, you're going to see some stuff you haven't seen before. We're also going to take it to the next level with some additional stuff.
Yeah, this is very neat testing that we're doing, making it better every time. And the results we're getting and what we can do, I don't think you've seen this anywhere else.
Yeah, so in the Aries video, you saw my wood prototype, which was pretty basic, but demonstrated some interesting test scenarios. Now I've got a completely new optics test rig that I've designed and I've machined and that we're starting to test. And let me tell you, that is taking stuff to the next level. So let's talk about this test setup. In the previous video, you saw my MOA 100-yard chart, essentially. It's like a target, but it's got a certain number of MOA left and right and up and down. This is a mil scope, so we used the mil version of that chart. And I spent quite a bit of time creating this chart, literally down to thousandths of an inch over 20 inches to make sure that the scale was correct. And that allows us to do quite a few things. We're testing at 100 yards. We're testing outdoors off of a table with the optics test rig. And the first thing that we took a look at is tracking. So what we did was we put the scope in the optics test rig. We got everything aligned. We got the camera perfectly lined up. And then we dialed up 3 mil, down 3 mil, left 3 mil, and right 3 mil. So what you can see here is our baseline chart shot. This was before we started any of the tracking what the scope looked like. So we went left 3 mil, and that actually makes your reticle go to the right, of course, because that's going to cause the bullet to go to the left, right, when you center up on your target. You can see here things were lined up really, really well. Then we went over to the right 3 mil, and again, almost perfect alignment. Up 3 mils, that takes the reticle down to the bottom of the target, almost there, not quite, and the same at the top. It seemed like the reticle overshot just a tiny bit.
Yeah, just a little tiny bit.
And to put this in perspective, I have the actual error here. So on the windage side, what we did is we took a look at the accumulation of the error over 3 mils. And we actually averaged both sides. So if the test rig wasn't perfectly lined up left to right or up and down, we want to average out what those dimensions were on either side in mils in this particular case. So we took both errors divided by 2, and then we're going over 3 mils total for each of those errors. So then we divided by 3 to get the error in mils per mil. And on the windage, that turned out to be 5/1000ths of a mil per mil. This is basically dead on. It's within what I would call the error of the test setup.
Yep.
We spent quite a while actually at 100 yards aligning the target to make sure that it wasn't tilted or rotated or cockeyed in any way. We actually sighted back to the 100-yard bench to make sure that we didn't have any of that angular error.
All squared up in all aspects.
Yep. And then onto the elevation, there was a bit more apparent elevation error, 0.021 mils per mil. But still, even at this level, you're going to be about a tenth of an inch in that ballpark at 100 yards. And you're going to be at 1 inch within 1,000 yards. So outside of the most stringent operating circumstances, that's really, really good.
Very good. It was very impressive.
Yep. And again, we had to do some manual adjustments of the rig when we were doing the testing, and those are new design features that are going to be in this next iteration.
Always improving.
Yep. Okay, so some of the other lab tests that we did. So what you get for free when you use the optics test rig and the optics test chart is reticle alignment and the scale of the hash marks on the reticle, those holdover marks. So you can see in this picture here, this still frame from the video that we recorded. We're recording this video in 4K Ultra HD. Reticle alignment is just about dead on. Now that involved going to the target. We had a level, and we had a precision level on that. Same exact level we used on the target, on the camera, and on the scope. One of the interesting things that we found was if you level off the top of the turret cap, and if you level off the bottom of the scope body where there's the flat, two completely different results.
Yep. All the stacking tolerances here give you a little bit different here. But we found that this, much better.
Yeah, in fact, in all three scopes that we tested this scope, we tested the Cronus, and we also tested the Leupold Mark V HD. Same operating setup, same everything, and we found on all three scopes that the turret caps were slightly different than that reference surface that's machined right onto the body of the scope. So guess what I'm going to do now every time I install a scope?
Go off the bottom?
Exactly.
Yeah, good idea.
If you want to do that at home and you just have a small scope level, you can use a machinist's parallel. It's a precision ground bar of steel. And that way you can basically have a slight ramp that comes off the side, and your magnetic scope level will stick right to it, and then you can easily grab that, even when it's on the rifle in low rings with the pick rail right under it.
Yep.
Yeah, so that worked out really well. So, and the hash marks here, we can see there's very, very slight error, but again, I was pretty impressed and pretty surprised at how well this scope lined up.
Very lined up.
Tested a few now, and these results look really, really good. Here's another new thing that we did this time is actual magnification testing. So what we did here was we put the scope up to maximum power and then worked up all the way through the different magnification levels, worked it all the way back down to the minimum, and then on each marked interval here on the magnification adjustment ring, we stopped the video when I was able to grab screen grabs of those, and then I applied a multiplier. So if I captured a screen capture at 10 power and one at 20 power, if you take the one at 10 power and you double its size and then put it right next to the one that was captured at 20 power, they should agree. And if you look at the chart here, pretty impressively consistent zoom. And again, this is me looking at a number and a little arrow and trying to line it up. This is not total rocket science and totally exact. But if you look, the 5X looks a little bit grainy because I had to punch that way up in its size, right? 5 times. 10X, 15X, 20X, 25X, very, very consistent zoom level and correct zoom level. I did take the scope off and take some video of the target at 100 yards, but it wasn't perfectly in focus and it was a little hard to see because it's this tiny little square. So that's the next step for that absolute comparison of essentially the naked eye versus the magnified scope. Here we can see we have relative consistency. And again, this is not the most critical factor, but it does demonstrate if this is advertising 25 power, yeah, we're getting 25 power. And then parallax. This is another interesting thing about our optics test rig. I wish I could show this to you, but it's got some proprietary technology that we're not ready to show yet. All that to say, if we want to move the camera with respect to the scope, as if your head is moving, looking behind the scope, we can do that side to side, we can do that fore aft, and we can do it up and down accurate easily to 1/1000th of an inch.
Yep.
And what we saw was, in order to get the camera dialed in, if you move the camera 4/1000ths of an inch to the left or the right, you can definitely see the difference in the shadow effect that you get when you're off center.
Definitely.
So The optics test rig is really what makes this possible. And so what we discovered was if we went over a full 1/8 of an inch or even 100,000ths of an inch, the image wasn't really clearly legible. So we backed that for this test off to 20,000ths of an inch. First capturing video in the center and then moving the camera 20,000ths to the left and to the right. And that simulates when you're looking through the scope and your head moves very slightly with respect to the scope, which happens, which is why your parallax is so important.
Very important.
Yeah. So here you see the left versus the centered versus the right. And I'm looking at it and I don't really see a difference at all. And that was with the scope indicating 100. Sometimes when you do that head side-to-side test, you notice you're going to be at 110, you're going to be at 90, whatever that number is, or even more. I've had more error than that. This one, right on.
Yeah, I think Athlon's got a good team on their quality control.
Yeah, this scope really is working well. Image distortion is another thing that we get pretty much for free when we have these still images looking through the scope. And what we're doing here is we're just taking that still image, everything is completely level, and I'm just drawing a box around that that's perfect on the computer. And if you look at the red box versus the black box on the outside of the large grid that we have on the target, you can see there is very little distortion. And that's just a sign of the optical quality that goes into these scopes. So that's the end of our lab testing. Overall, my thoughts are this is basically coming in at above its price point is what I would say there.
Definitely. Yeah, people that are going to buy this scope, they're going to be very pleased. They're going to have a good quality scope. They're going to get consistent results with it. So I think they'll be happy with it.
All right, let's now talk shooting impressions because I've had this scope on at least 2 rifles that I can think of recently. We had it on the Howa 1500 that I rebarreled for 6mm Creedmoor. That was 6 Creed UR. And then a video that I haven't published yet, Fred Zeglin from 4D Reamer Rentals was just here this week. He built a rifle here on the channel. You're going to want to check that out. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was very cool.
He took a 350 Legend bolt action Ruger American and rebarreled it for 300 blackout, and it was just really fun to be here with him and to do that. We used this scope on that as well. And you know, after shooting with this scope, the only thing I'm thinking I want on this is a lever.
Yeah.
Because I have that on my other Midas TACs,
Yeah,
and I like that for PRS type scenarios.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, better for target acquisition. Yeah.
It's a little bit hard to evaluate the optical quality in some of the conditions we're shooting in lately because there's so much heat boil.
Yeah, it's been hot.
Yep. But you can see if you look at some of the images, and if you click on that first link in the video description, we'll have, you know, more optical quality examples. Nothing too scientific yet. We don't really have that capability, but looking through with the naked eye, I would say it holds up really well.
Yep, I'm impressed. We'll be using it more and getting more results from it, and we'll refine our testing process. Maybe we'll test it again and see if we come up with some more news.
So that concludes the main portion of this review, but what we would like is your feedback. Not only about this Midas TAC scope, but also about the information that we just shared with you. You know, we're really excited to have this ability to essentially do car and driver testing, but for scopes. You know, this hasn't been done before. So much of scope testing is subjective, typically.
Yep.
And when we're able to put static numbers to things and we're able to actually quantify things, this is really great. And one of the things that we've been talking about is really diving into that optics quality aspect of the testing.
Yep.
Can we show contrast and clarity? Go a little bit further with image distortion, chromatic aberration. These are things that are very, very important, and they're just numbers, right? And they're just values, and they're just test charts potentially. But they definitely do change what you're going to see looking through the scope. And in some of these scenarios, like, you know, hunting at dusk, when you're not in the best lighting conditions, you know, some of those factors, and even the field of view for that matter, become really, really important.
Yep. We're just hoping that we can improve our testing. You guys give us some ideas and thoughts we're going to continue to try this, and we're going to continue to develop it and make it better and better.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. So thank you for watching this video. That concludes what we're going to talk about with this scope, and that means it's time to wrap it up. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. Also, make your voice heard. If you have something to say, please drop a comment. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications because you're not going to want to miss the awesome content that is coming up. And finally, flex your reloading pride. You could look great in one of these t-shirts. We've got multiple designs at the Ultimate Reloader store. I'll see you later because I'm off to go shooting.